One of the most anticipated UFC heavyweight championship fights of the last decade.
You couldn't have mapped out a better way to fight Francis Ngannou than the way Stipe is doing it.
Stipe Miocic, a dominant mixed martial arts effort here tonight.
Francis is just a scary, scary man.
Francis Ngannou has freak power like no one in the division.
One shot and he will put you to sleep.
The greatest UFC heavyweight champion of all time.
The baddest man on the planet is Stipe Miocic.
Once again, the heavyweight division belongs to Stipe Miocic.
So much power in both of their hands.
Holy smoke!
He put Biggie Boy out bad.
Stipe's throwing some hammers here. Oh!
The people's main event because it does not get no better.
The countdown to UFC 260 continues. UFC heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic set to defend his belt for a second time against Francis Ngannou Saturday night on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. And in just a few moments, every fighter set to appear at UFC 260 will step on that scale right there at UFC Apex for their official weigh-in. And with that, we say hello and welcome to the UFC 260 official weigh-in show here on ESPN Plus. I'm Michael Eaves. A reminder, if you haven't done so already, make sure you go to espnplus.com/ppv to order UFC 260 because what a card we have. Again, this is one of the more highly anticipated heavyweight rematches we've had in quite some time, and it gets top billing on the main card at UFC 260, 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. Of course, we do have the heavyweights going at it, but how about in the co-main event? Former welterweight champion Tyron Woodley looking to get back on track against number 10 contender Vicente Luque, and also Sean O'Malley returns following his first loss when he takes on Thomas Almeida. Again, UFC 260 pay-per-view. Go to espnplus.com/ppv right now to order. But again, we got to get to the weigh-ins first to make sure everyone is set for tomorrow night's billing there in Vegas. And for more coverage, we send it out to Ariel Helwani and Brett Okamoto. What's up, guys?
Michael, good to see you as always. Brett, good to see you as well. This is my favorite part of Fight Week, as I've said time and again. And historically, when you have a heavyweight title fight, the intrigue for the weigh-ins isn't as great as, say, a lightweight title fight, a featherweight title fight, a bantamweight title fight, etc. But dare I say, this one's a little different, Brett, because the first time Stipe Miocic fought Francis Ngannou back in January of 2018, he weighed in at 246 pounds. Prior to his last fight in August against Daniel Cormier, he weighed in at 233 pounds. Earlier this week on Eye on the Bad Guy, my partner Chael Sonnen said if he weighs in, Stipe that is, under 240, that might be a problem for Stipe come Saturday night. And so, yes, we both expect Francis and Stipe to make weight, but I am really curious to see how much Stipe in particular weighs, because if he's under that 240 mark, that can mean we're going to see a different kind of fight come Saturday night, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, it showed what he put value on, I think, just in general in his career, but also particularly in the trilogy against Daniel Cormier. He wanted to be light on his feet, and that was clearly the right move for that fight. I mean, his striking and his cardio and just his balance and just everything about Stipe, we were raving about how he looked physically when he was fighting Daniel Cormier, especially obviously in those last two fights, which he won. But to your point, it will be interesting because it is a very, very different opponent in Francis Ngannou. I believe it's going to be a much very different game plan. So I would expect him to come in again in the 230s. But like Chael said, it's going to be very intriguing to see because I think we're going to get maybe a little bit of a hint at what he's thinking if he does come in heavier than when he was fighting DC in those two fights previously.
And of course, worth mentioning, we're not expecting much of a difference in Francis's weight. First time they fought in 2018, he was 263. In his last fight back in May of 2020, UFC 249, he was 261.5. So not much has changed as far as Francis's physique and weight, but certainly a lot of people can make a very strong case that a lot has changed in terms of his confidence, in terms of his skill set. Yes, we have not seen him go past the 71-second mark in his last 4 fights, but I think we can make a case that both men have improved since January of 2018. However, I actually think Stipe has
Thank you all for
improved
being here for the
a lot more
official weigh-ins for
so than
UFC
Francis. I'll
260.
get your take
Miocic
on that
versus Ngannou
in a matter
2,
of
and we'll
moments. But
begin
for now,
UFC
let's kick
Women's
things
Flyweight
off.
Division.
My
Main
favorite
card
part of
offering
fight
here,
week,
15th
10
in the
fights
world,
total,
Jillian
20
Robertson.
fighters will step on the scale. And the first one, as our MC John Anik just pointed out, is fellow Canadian Jillian Robertson. She's going up against Miranda Maverick in an important 125-pound women's bout. This bout was supposed to take place in February, just last month. Unfortunately, day of the event, the fight was canceled due to COVID protocols, so now we're getting a chance to see Robertson and Maverick once again. Here's Jillian Robertson, first up on the scale.
125.5, the official weight for Jillian Robertson. 125.5, the official weight for Jillian Robertson.
So there you hear it, 125.5 for Jillian Robertson. Holds the record for most submissions in UFC women's
lightweight division.
history.
This man will take part in the pay-per-view opener, Jamie Mullarkey.
Robertson, by the way, with 4 submissions in her UFC career. There's a bunch of other people with 3, but she is number 1, also tied for the most flyweight victories in the UFC women's history. Let's say hello now to Jamie Mullarkey, who's fighting on the main card against Kama Worthy, 12-4 as a pro. Fighting out of Australia, has lost his last 2 fights in a row, both of those UFC fights, so he's 0-2 inside the octagon.
155 1/2 pounds, the official weight for Jamie Mullarkey.
155.5 for Jamie Mullarkey, looking to pick up his very first win in the UFC tomorrow on the main card against Kama Worthy. This card has been hit with a bunch of different cancellations. This one got bumped up as a result of the fact that a few of those fights fell off.
His third UFC appearance here tomorrow night in the light heavyweight division, Modestas Bukauskas.
Of course, we were supposed to see Alexander Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega in the co-main event. That fight canceled late last week after Volkanovski tested positive. So we forge on with 10 fights on this card. Of course, none bigger than the heavyweight title fight in the main event. We'll say hello now to Modestas Bukauskas, who meets Michal Eaves.
205.5, the official weight for Modestas Bukauskas.
That's the Baltic Gladiator, weighs in at 205.5. Fighting out of England, born in Lithuania, coming off a loss to Jimmy Crute. Again, he meets Michal Oleksiejczuk
in the
for the
UFC women's
prelims.
flyweight division, Miranda Maverick.
Say hello now to Miranda Maverick, 8-2 as a pro, undefeated in the UFC, former Invicta FC Phoenix Series champion. She won that flyweight tournament as a win over Pearl Gonzalez, former UFC fighter Deanna Bennett as well. Won her debut back in October of last year.
126, the official weight for Miranda Maverick.
So the Miranda Maverick versus Jillian Robertson fight is good to go. Yes, we did see this exact same scenario back in February, but hopefully come tomorrow they will actually step foot in the cage and compete against each other. A very good fight in the flyweight division.
Now we go back to the UFC's light heavyweight division as we welcome Michal Oleksiejczuk.
Here's the aforementioned Oleksiejczuk, a.k.a. Lord. You know, you feel pretty good about yourself if you're calling yourself Lord. He fights out of Poland, riding a 2-fight losing streak. Lost to Jimmy Crute as well in his last fight back in February of 2020. So this is his first fight post-pandemic, if you will, even though we're still in the midst of the pandemic. Also, prior to that, lost to Ovince St. Preux. Did have a 3-fight winning streak, or at least I should say a 3-fight unbeaten streak in the UFC prior to that.
The official weight 206 pounds for Michal Oleksiejczuk.
206 pounds for the Polish born Michal Oleksiejczuk. So that means his fight against Modestas Bukauskas is good to go. That's on the early prelims. The action kicks off at 7:30.
Next up in the UFC's welterweight division, we welcome Abubakar Nurmagomedov.
Abubakar Nurmagomedov, another member of the famed Nurmagomedov family. There you see, I do believe, Khabib Nurmagomedov. That is Khabib, right, Brett? I guess it's hard to tell with the mask, but it looks like him from afar.
Yep, Khabib is with him.
That is Khabib Nurmagomedov, the now former UFC lightweight champion. My pick for the 2021 Coach of the Year. Great start for him and his family. Islam Makhachev recently picking up a big win. We got Usman Nurmagomedov.
170 and 1/2 pounds, the official weight for Abubakar Nurmagomedov.
So Nurmagomedov weighs in successfully, looking to pick up his first UFC victory. We haven't seen him since November of 2019. He goes up against Jared Gordon on the prelims as well. 15-3-1 as a pro for Nurmagomedov. Of course, fighting out of Makhachkala, much like Khabib and all the other famous Dagestani fighters who have now made their mark on not only the UFC, but promotions all over this great world. He's just 31 years old, so big
All right,
opportunity
next fighter
for
to
him.
the scale in the UFC's middleweight division, Abu Azaitar.
Let's say hello now to Abu Azaitar. Looking to extend his unbeaten streak in the UFC to 2-0. Haven't seen him since 2018. Brother of Atman Azaitar, not to be confused with the Azaitar brother who now famously was released for a month by the UFC. The whole bag controversy. He's now back in the UFC. This is his brother. Going up against Marc-Andre Barrios.
185 and 1/2, the official weight for Abu Azaitar.
So Abu Azaitar, the 35-year-old, it's his mark, born in Germany, training out of Cologne, Germany to be exact. Has a win in the UFC over Vitor Miranda back in July of 2018. A couple fights canceled since then. Looking to get back on track tomorrow against the Quebecois Marc-Andre Barrios.
All right, next fighter to the scale, 1/2 of the featured prelim live on ESPN tomorrow night in the light heavyweight division, Alonzo Menefield.
Here is Alonzo Menefield, 9-2 as a pro. Always in great shape. Looking to get back on track as well. He has a 2-fight losing streak that he is currently staring at. Losses to Vince St. Preux in September. Prior to that, Devin Clark was on a nice roll. Contender Series product, 2-0 in the UFC, following that big win over Paul Craig.
205 pounds, the official weight for Alonzo Menefield.
And so Alonzo Menefield is good to go. He meets Fabio Cherant tomorrow. Was supposed to fight William Knight. That fight got canceled. 33 years young. Automatic Alonzo Menefield. So far, 8 minutes in, no hiccups, and you expect that in the early going. No one's going to show up this early to miss weight, usually. It's happened a couple times around 15 minutes in. But so far, we are good to go. Like I said, 20 fighters in total. A lot of intrigue surrounding Stipe Miocic's weight. We have yet to see both the champion, hailing from Ohio, or the challenger, Francis
All right, moving on
Ngannou.
now to the UFC's featherweight division. Please welcome Shane Young.
Now, though, let us say hello to Shane Young, 13-5, smoking Shane Young. Of course, training out of City Kickboxing in New Zealand. He's coming off a loss back in September to Ludovic Klein. Prior to that, had won 2 fights in a row in the UFC.
145 and 1/2, the official weight for Shane Young.
145 and a half for smoking Shane Young. 27 years old. In a big week, big month, I should say, for City Kickboxing. Not exactly going as planned. Of course, Israel Adesanya losing, Volkanovski being pulled from the fight. Alberg losing. That's the way it goes in mixed martial arts. So Shane Young looking to right the wrong of the past few weeks for City Kickboxing. He meets Omar Morales on the prelims tomorrow night. 5-fight main
Our
card.
next fighter to the scale, you can see him compete live on pay-per-view tomorrow night in the UFC's bantamweight division, Sugar Sean O'Malley.
Yes, the return of the Sugar Show. Sean O'Malley, coming off his very first pro loss, Chito Vera back in August, but he still considers himself an undefeated fighter. This has rubbed some people the wrong way, but that's the mindset he has going into this fight. He meets Thomas Almeida, a veteran of the game. Big opportunity for Sean O'Malley to prove the doubters wrong.
Even. 136 pounds, the official weight for Sean O'Malley.
So, of course, it is a bantamweight fight, non-title fight. You get that 1 pound allowance. O'Malley lost in the first round to Marlon Vera back at UFC 252 the last time Stipe fought. Claims it was a fluke. Not sure I agree, but nevertheless, none of that matters as he returns tomorrow against Thomas Almeida. Big fight for O'Malley, big fight for Almeida, who has lost his last 3 fights in a row. There was a time not that long ago, Thomas Almeida was undefeated, 21-0, excuse me. And since then, it has been a tough go for the Brazilian Thomas Almeida. That's a big fight in the 135-pound division. Of course, you also have the main event, Stipe Miocic, Francis Ngannou. Typically, we like to see the heavyweights come early because they don't have to cut a lot of weight, but it does add to some of the intrigue. Is that it for now, Brett? Are we, last time we did this a couple of weeks ago, we had like a 35-minute stretch of everyone showing up. It seems like things are a little slower this time around.
It looks like we're going to get a little bit of a break, yeah. I can't see the fighters from where I'm sitting. It looks like the commission's kind of looking over there, that maybe we might have one. It looks like there is fighters over there, but they got their hands crossed. Looks like we got a little bit of time to chat about this main event, Ariel.
All right, well, we have 10 fighters down, 10 to go. Update regarding the main event, courtesy of our friends over at Caesars William Hill. Francis Ngannou now a -135 favorite, while the champion Stipe Miocic is back to being a +115 underdog. It was an interesting thing because it seemed like Stipe was about to become the favorite. I'm just curious, as a betting man, as a Vegas guy, are you surprised that Stipe is still the underdog at this juncture going into the fight?
I'm not actually. And he, when this line first was open at some spots, Ngannou was a bigger favorite even than he is now. I think that the betting market has always put a lot of faith in Francis Ngannou, and they haven't always put a lot of faith in our guy Stipe. It's a narrative. It feels like every time this guy is fighting, I think he's, Mark Raimondi, who's sitting right behind me, so I could probably ask him. I think he's only been a favorite in 2 of the 8 title fights that he's had thus far. He's nodding, so I think that must be correct. So yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised because that is how bettors or Vegas has looked at Stipe Miocic, and he even said Vegas doesn't like me. They always put the odds against my favor, but he has proved them wrong time and time again, and we'll be looking to do it again here in this rematch.
Yeah, the week started out with Ngannou a -125, Stipe +105, so now it's -135 for the challenger, +115 for the underdog. How about Mark Raimondi strategically sitting right above or in back of your right shoulder to get all that airtime? I mean, you can't fault the guy for doing that, Michael. That's a veteran move right there from Mark Raimondi. You got to respect it, Michael.
You always got to know where the camera is, and Mark clearly knows where it is for the official weigh-ins. We'll get back to Vegas in a moment, but we talk about how anticipated this rematch is. What we have to do, though, is rewind the calendar all the way back to 2018 for the first meeting between Miocic and Ngannou, which took top billing at UFC 220. Now, that matchup was one of the most hyped bouts in the history of the heavyweight division at the time, but the fight itself didn't exactly play out the way most fans wanted it to, and it had very little to do with who won, but rather how Miocic earned that unanimous decision. Here's a quick refresher on what went down that night more than 3 years ago.
Boston tonight plays host to one of the most anticipated UFC heavyweight championship fights of the last decade. Oh, big right hand over the top for Ngannou. Get on that leg.
Oh, he got tagged.
90 seconds gone.
Oh. Big shot by Stipe over the top. Oh, good right hand by Stipe. Beautiful. Oh!
Now's a pull two off the jab of Ngannou. Beautiful top takedown. And this is where we see what Ngannou is made of.
Ngannou looks lost.
Ngannou visibly fatigued as he gets back to a right hand by Stipe. Beautiful. He's home. Stipe shoots again. Just a little quicker.
You're looking at a very tired, giant man. He's never experienced this before. When was the last time you saw a guy in a world title fight in the 5th round that's this tired? You couldn't have mapped out a better way to fight Francis Ngannou than the way Stipe is doing it right now.
Stipe Miocic has survived and conquered Francis Ngannou tonight.
I learned a lot tonight. We're going to come back really stronger.
It was a Stipe show tonight. It wasn't about him, it was about me. I'm the champ. I broke the record. I'm the best.
Yeah, what that fight 3 years ago proved was that in that time and space, Miocic was simply the better all-around fighter. Hey, take a look at some notable stats from that matchup. Ngannou attempted more significant strikes, but he only landed 21 of 113 thrown. The champ, however, much more accurate, landing his strikes at an impressive 73% rate. As we bring Ariel and Brett back into the conversation, you know, guys, when I think back to that fight, it was anticipated that we would probably get a knockout because of the way that Ngannou had come in to that first shot at a title. But a couple things that were also revealed there. That Stipe can take a punch. There's no question about that. He took on the onslaught early on, Ariel, from Ngannou, and then outlasted him clearly and was the better overall fighter. And you wonder how the strategy will change from Miocic's standpoint going into the rematch, but also what improvements has Ngannou made that gives anyone the indication that it won't be a complete similarity to what happened in the first bout.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Michael. And, you know, it's funny. I remember watching that fight, being in Boston for the first one, and absolutely being riveted by every single second, especially that first round. You know, I've said this a few times this week, but I gave the first round of that fight my award for the 2018 round of the year. And a lot of people said I was crazy for doing that, but it's because the tension was so great. Francis was on this amazing roll. He had just knocked out Alistair Overeem in one of the most vicious knockouts we've ever seen in the UFC, like a month and a half prior. And we all thought that he was going to do the same to Stipe. And in the early portion of that first round, he was tagging him, and he was landing big shots right there. But Stipe was able to weather the storm and get back on track and ultimately ride it out. Let's say hello now before I continue. Let's give the person who's about to walk up on the stage here his due. That is Thomas Almeida. All right, so let's just take a quick break on the Stipe talk and say hello to Almeida, who is going up against Sugar Sean O'Malley. We'll get Brett's thoughts on that main event as well. Here's Thomas Almeida.
The official weight, 136 pounds for Thomas Almeida.
136 pounds for Thomas Almeida. That fight taking place on the main card, it got bumped up as a result of the Alex Volkanovski, Brian Ortega cancellation. Co-main event now, return of the former UFC welterweight champion Tyron Woodley going up against the always tough, always game Vicente Luque. Perhaps I have some time to finish my thought. Francis was so aggressive in that first round. I think he landed something like 17 significant strikes, then 5 for the next 4 rounds. So clearly he overexerted himself. Clearly he wasn't ready to go those extra rounds and certainly go into the championship rounds. And to me, Brett, that's the biggest question going into this fight. Like, we all know what Francis can do in the first round. We all know how good and dangerous he could be. But how does he look in the fourth and fifth rounds? They say he's a different fighter. He says he's a different fighter. I know he's training with a different team now than he was back in 2018. But that's the biggest and most intriguing question to be answered come Saturday, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of questions that Francis has to answer, quite frankly. One of them, of course, being what you just mentioned, is he still dangerous in later rounds? We simply don't know that. And I've talked to Eric Nixick, Francis's coach, about that, and he said, yeah, that's a fair question. We haven't shown that. I've always been of the
All right, next fighter to the scale in the UFC's middleweight division. He is
don't just tell me it. You got to show me it, and we haven't shown that yet. He said we are very confident that he can fight later into a fight, and also we are confident that he's not just a defensive wrestling that we've been working on. It's actually an offensive wrestling that Francis has really enjoyed wrestling. He's taken to it. It's not something that he feels like he has to do. It's something that he wants to do, and he actually wants to take somebody down. In fact, when he fought Jairzinho Rozenstruik almost a year ago, back in May, in Jacksonville, actually, his coach was telling me that he wanted to take him down. He wanted to try and land some ground and pound in that fight, and he was actually frustrated that he couldn't do it. His opening seconds in that fight didn't look like he wanted to wrestle. He ran over there and knocked out Jairzinho in one punch. But that's what his team is telling me, is that he's looking at wrestling not just as something that he has to do in order to keep a fight standing where he wants it, that he's becoming a fully rounded mixed martial artist. And it's
185 pounds, the official weight for
Stipe Miocic, he's going to have to show in some form or fashion that he is, in fact, a full mixed martial artist.
And so there you see the pride of Gatineau, Quebec, Marc-André Barriault. He has never won in the UFC, 0-3 in one no contest. And so one might say that this is a must-win situation for the Canadian. He goes up against Abu Azaitar in the curtain jerker on Saturday. Now back to the main event conversation, Brett. Obviously, there is a lot at stake in this fight, but it's one of those rare fights where the next fight is even greater in terms of what could be at stake, right? You got Jon Jones just waiting there. And I know Dana White said yesterday, it would be hard to not give Stipe another crack at the title if he loses this fight. I don't see a scenario, unless things are going horribly wrong with Jon, although recently Dana White said things are going really great with Jon, that they don't do Jon versus Francis Ngannou if he wins. You get the sense from either Francis or Stipe that they're looking past Saturday, because getting a chance to fight Jon Jones, arguably the greatest fighter of all time, in his heavyweight debut, one of the most anticipated, fights and move-ups in UFC history, you get the sense that either man is looking past Saturday night because that Jon Jones lottery ticket is so great.
Not even slightly. No. In fact, I think if Stipe had really wanted to fight Jon Jones, he probably could have done it in this fight. If he would have said, I'm the greatest heavyweight of all time, I just beat Daniel Cormier and proved it in the trilogy. I've beaten Francis Ngannou back in 2018, just 3 years ago. I beat him 5 rounds to nothing. I want Jon Jones. I think that, him being the champion and saying that and then fans getting behind it, I think he probably could have gone that route if he wanted it. He actually went the opposite route. He said that Jon Jones didn't deserve a title fight, even though he's considered, by many to be the greatest fighter of all time. He said, I don't think that this guy deserves to just hop up and jump Francis Ngannou in line. So I don't think either one of these guys is looking at him. And quite frankly, Ariel, I'm a little bit surprised. I think that Jon Jones has kind of been absent of this pre-fight talk. I mean, of course he's there. I mean, we're never going to ignore him completely. But, when you kind of bring up the possibility of him overshadowing things, you would have thought so, right? I mean, you would have thought the idea of Jon Jones finally coming to heavyweight, something that we've been kind of waiting for him to do, a step we've been waiting for him to take for a very long time, and now he's finally doing it, and he's going to fight one of these two guys who both of those is a very, very, very marketable fight. I feel like, and I like the fact that this is the case, that we haven't been talking about Jon Jones too much. He has not overshadowed the significance of this fight, and I think that speaks to how important this fight is. I think that speaks to the intrigue of what happened in the first fight, how we kind of think that maybe Francis wasn't quite ready for it, and now here he is 3 years later, and he's the favorite again to beat this guy Stipe that we're calling the greatest heavyweight of all time. I think that the narrative around this fight is so strong that it hasn't had to really lean on this, idea that Jon Jones is looming in the future.
Brett, that's a good point. One, that Jon Jones has been relatively quiet by his own standards, if you will, especially on social media. Unless he's talking about Israel Adesanya, maybe he doesn't want to talk too much about Miocic or Ngannou in that regard. But this fight itself, and Ariel, you brought up the point, like, as a fight fan, if Ngannou wins this, why would you not want to see the trilogy against Stipe even before Jon Jones gets his first shot at the title in his first bout at heavyweight? Look, Dana White is in the business of making great fights to make great money, and anybody who gets a chance to fight Jon Jones is going to be in line for a payday, and I get that. But from a fight standpoint, in terms of fandom and what we just saw a great trilogy with Miocic and Cormier. Why would you not run it back, Ariel, 3 times with Ngannou and Stipe if Francis is able to win Saturday?
Well, unless Jon Jones is playing hardball very secretly behind the scenes and we know nothing of this, unless he is saying, if you don't pay me X amount, much like what happened, last year when they were sort of flirting with the idea of him fighting Francis Ngannou, I would be absolutely floored, probably more shocked than I've ever been covering this sport if they go with Francis versus Stipe 3 if Stipe loses tomorrow night and not Francis versus Jon Jones. Number one, Jon hasn't fought since February of 2020, so it's been now over a year since his last fight. He's not getting any younger. Number two, the idea of Jon Jones moving up to heavyweight for the very first time and putting his undefeated record, I still consider him undefeated, even though he has that one DQ loss to Matt Hamill back in 2010. I still consider him as such. To now go up to heavyweight and fight the hard-hitting Francis Ngannou, like that is a big box office fight. And with all due respect to Stipe Miocic, who we all love, he is not a box office draw thus far. He doesn't go out of his way to promote fights. Even when he does promote fights, he's not someone who the audience is captivated by his interviews and his press conferences and whatnot. And so they would have to make that fight. So yes, meritocracy-wise, being fair-wise, yeah, absolutely, he has done enough to warrant it. But go back to 2018 when Daniel Cormier knocked him out. They didn't even give him a chance to talk on the microphone. They were trying to do Daniel versus Brock Lesnar, and you could have made a case that he deserved an immediate rematch over Daniel right then and there. So I don't see it happening. Even though it would be fair and it would be a nice thing, they're making Francis versus Jon Jones. They have to make it. It's just too big of a fight.
Hey, Brett, let me ask you this, because as popular and successful as Jon Jones has been during his career, he's also done some things to turn some fans off, quite frankly. And what do you say to the fans out there who be like, you know what, Jon Jones, yeah, arguably maybe the greatest of all time, but he's never fought at heavyweight before. Why is he getting a shot at the championship in his very first bout in heavyweight when maybe some other guys that could deserve it because they've been in that division longer? I understand the fight game, but to those fans out there who think that Jon Jones is once again getting preferential treatment possibly, what do you say to that?
When you're considered one of the, if not the greatest fighter of all time, you don't have to take a non-title fight to prove that you can take a championship. I mean, look at what just happened at the last pay-per-view. We saw a middleweight champion in Israel Adesanya move up and challenge Jan Blachowicz, and no one really complained about that because in that situation, it's similar to this situation with Jon moving up. It actually does make sense, and you're not going to hear a whole lot of heavyweights complain about it because, quite frankly, the only one that would have been able to complain about it is the guy who is in fact getting the title shot this weekend, and that's Francis Ngannou. Had Jon Jones, he vacated the title a while ago. It's not like he just gave this thing up last week. Had he vacated the belt and the UFC said, okay, we're going to push you into a UFC title fight right away with Stipe Miocic, I think Francis Ngannou would have lost his mind over that a little bit. But he was the only one. He is the only guy who really had that strong of a case to say, hey, what more do I got to do? He basically didn't even have any fights left. There was no other fight to make for Francis Ngannou that would even keep him busy, just because literally not a single one of them made sense. So I get it. You want to look at preferential treatment. You want to look at, hey, is the UFC potentially making the wrong fight just for the box office draw? But that is simply not the case here. Jon Jones has been arguably the best fighter over the last 10 years, and him getting a title shot at heavyweight would be really the only fight that would make sense for him at heavyweight as well.
Yeah, but haters going to hate. They're always going to try to find a way to say that someone doesn't deserve something. But as you said, yes, Jon Jones is the greatest. And if he's going to be a heavyweight, we want to see that for a championship belt right off the jump. More from Ariel and Brett in a moment. But let's turn our attention back now to Francis Ngannou. And if you take a look at the history of combat sports, maybe Mike Tyson arguably had one of the greatest reigns in boxing history in the late 80s and 90s, into the early 90s. The sheer fear that Tyson was able to instill into his opponents well before the first round bell was something boxing hadn't really seen up to that point. You fast forward 30 years later, and now the world of MMA may have that very same version of fear as it relates to Francis Ngannou. More now from Max Kellerman.
A man who's thinking or worried about getting hit is not going to have a good sense of anticipation. He will, in fact, get hit. Those words are as true today for all forms of combat as when legendary boxing trainer Cus D'Amato spoke them years ago. Cus used his understanding of fear to mold his greatest protege into one of the most feared men ever to enter the arena of hand-to-hand combat, Iron Mike Tyson.
This is why we're here. Who in this world has any chance against this man?
If you haven't seen him fight, you're in for a treat.
Mike Tyson is the man they've come to see.
Tyson was a fighter unlike any that had stepped in the ring before him. The intimidator who struck fear in the hearts of opponents. Fighters who were beaten before the first bell ever sounded.
I fear no man, no mortal, nobody but God.
There has not up till now been a Mike Tyson, a heavyweight intimidator like that in the sport of MMA. Enter a 6'4", 260-pound, #1 UFC heavyweight contender from Cameroon, who has always stepped into the octagon with the same aura and purpose that Tyson brought to the squared circle. Francis Ngannou has brought power and intimidation reminiscent of Tyson. And the similarities between the two are there in the record. Through their first 18 fights, Tyson had 12 first-round knockouts, Ngannou 11. The fastest KO of Tyson's career, 30 seconds against Marvis Frazier, 1986. Ngannou's fastest KO, 20 seconds against Jairzinho Rozenstruik.
Oh! It's over. Rozenstruik is out!
Tyson stopped 6 straight, leading to his first title shot against Trevor Berbick in 1986. Ngannou, 6 consecutive finishes before his. But Ngannou wasn't fighting Trevor Berbick, an unlikely underdog champion, as Tyson did. No, Ngannou's shot came against Stipe Miocic at UFC 220.
I won. There's a big in R2.
Now, at UFC 260, Ngannou has a chance to do something Iron Mike never did. Beat the guy who wasn't scared of him the first time.
I want the title shot back. I want my place in the division.
You must understand fear so you can manipulate it, D'Amato said. Fear is a friend of exceptional people.
Well, if there was ever a fighter who deserved the nickname the Predator, it is Francis Ngannou. In his UFC career, he's won 7 fights by first-round knockout, all of which came in the first 2 minutes. His 7 first-round KOs are tied for the second most in the UFC modern era, bested only by Anthony Johnson with 9. I'll bring Brett and Ariel back in. And Brett, let me start with you. When you talk about pure punching power, there's no question that Francis Ngannou had some of the best power that UFC has ever seen. But as it relates to the fear question, if Stipe Miocic had any fear whatsoever of Ngannou's punching power, even though he didn't admit it the first bout, he clearly doesn't have it now because he withstood it in that first bout. As it relates to the rematch, though, how do you see that in terms of the striking significance of Ngannou playing out a second time against Miocic?
Oh man, Michael, I'd hesitate to say Stipe has no fear of the punches, because I think even if you've taken them and you've lived to talk about it, you don't want to take them again. Even in that first round, which is really the round where Francis was the most dangerous, as we've all talked about, in that first fight in 2018, that's when he did his damage. Other than that, Stipe was very, very much in control of that fight, taking him down, and Francis just looked completely gassed out in there. But even in for those first 5 minutes, he caused considerable damage to Stipe's face. So talking to Stipe's coach, Marcus Marinelli, they're very aware of that. They don't want to taste Francis Ngannou's power again. They know that, hey, our guy is extremely durable, extremely tough. It's hard to get him out of there. But we also know that Francis Ngannou is wearing 4-ounce gloves and he's got a tremendous amount of power. If they can get out of this fight without getting touched, of course that's what they want to do. And I think, of course, that means wrestling, but it also means a lot of movement on the feet. We saw that with Stipe after he did get knocked out by Daniel Cormier. That's, Ariel and I were talking about it earlier. That's when, the weight really went down. The movement has looked great in those the second fight against DC and the third third fight against DC, and I think it's going to be the same thing here. He's going to be looking to take Francis down, but he's not just going to go in there and drop his head and shoot a single leg. He's going to be moving. He's going to be angling off punches. You know, Marcus Marinelli was talking about getting his head off that center line. You just want to be in safe places as much as possible when you're engaging with Francis, and then, of course, look for those takedowns that were so successful in the first fight.
Ariel, when you think of, you know, the greatest heavyweights of all time, and clearly Miocic is in that conversation on the Mount Rushmore, but as it pertains to pure punching power, where do you put Ngannou?
Oh, I certainly put him up there alongside the likes of Anthony Johnson. I would disagree with one thing that Max Kellerman said in that piece. I do think we forget about Brock Lesnar and how intimidating he was as a UFC champion, especially in those 4 fights between 2008, 2019. I mean, this man was scary and was knocking people out. It didn't last very long, but that takes nothing away from the point and, of course, what Francis has been doing as of late. My colleague Daniel Cormier said it on Monday very well. He could be the first guy since Brock Lesnar to really capture the imagination of the mainstream public and let everyone know that the baddest man on the planet truly is the heavyweight champion, because he has the punching power, he has the finishes, he has the look, he has everything that you would want in the heavyweight champion of the world. The big question to me is, since June of 2019, this man has only fought 20 seconds in the cage, and that's no knock on him. In fact, he's been very frustrated over the past year and a half. He couldn't get a fight leading up to his return in May. There were the issues with the pandemic. Then, of course, after the pandemic, or his fight against Jairzinho, the 22nd victory, very impressive. You know, he's trying to get the John Jones fight. Then it gets too close to the heavyweight trilogy fight with Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic, so he has to wait for the winner of that. And so 20 seconds, Michael, since June of 2019 is not a lot of time in the cage. Meanwhile, you have Stipe, who's going 4 rounds with Daniel Cormier in August of 2019, who's going 5 rounds with Daniel Cormier in August of 2020. He's put in the time against one of the greatest fighters of all time. That has to mean something. That has to say something about one guy going in there and honing his skills, as opposed to someone who's been on the sidelines frustrated and just kind of chomping at the bit. Is he overexerting himself? Is he overtraining? He wasn't injured. He wasn't trying to get back to 100%. He was just, you know, like I said, chomping at the bit. I wonder what that all means for a guy who we've had questions about his cardio in the past. So that, to me, is a really fascinating thing that I can't wait to see how it plays out on Saturday.
Well, Brett, you spoke to Ngannou recently. What conversations did you have with him, or maybe even members in his camp, about his lack of cage time over the last several months?
Yeah, it's one of those situations where what are you going to do? You know, like we mentioned earlier, there just wasn't a fight there for him. That John Jones, idea certainly gained some steam on social media, and it was a fight that fans really wanted to see. But in terms of actually, coming together, I don't think it was ever super, super close. I think Francis, especially as that trilogy fight with DC and Stipe started to get more near in August of last year, it was just pretty obvious that he was going to wait for that opportunity and face the winner of it. So in order to combat that time off, I mean, you try to do what you can in practice. And what's interesting is that it's not easy to replicate a fight for Francis Ngannou in practice either. I mean, a lot of these guys who are smaller, you could, ring rust is a real thing, but you can put them in with a bunch of different bodies. They're in practice. They're surrounded with people. A lot of these guys have that luxury when they're in these camps and there are other UFC fighters around. Francis Ngannou, who wants to spar Francis Ngannou? You think people are just raising their hands saying, yeah, I'll have a fight. I'll have a spar day with Francis Ngannou. It is difficult to find those guys. And so, his camp has told me that they've invested a lot of money, quite frankly, to bring in bodies, to pay these guys to be willing to take the beatings that Francis is dishing out. Because, Francis Ngannou, his sparring sessions look a lot like his fights. They're tough. They're difficult. They're tough on the guys who are in there with them. I heard a story about how, they found a guy who came in the first round. He got thrown on his head from Francis and he never came back. So these are real problems that Francis has had to deal with. But I will say, to Ariel's point about Stipe having those fights against DC, I'm not sure that that's a great thing for Stipe either, though. Yes, he's had that cage time. Yes, he's been active. Yes, he has momentum going on his side, but those were tough fights. Those were not easy fights. He took some damage in those fights. So to me, it's a little bit of a wash. It's going to be interesting to see how they each react to their own set of circumstances, but I don't know if the fact that Stipe has been in there and had tough fights with Daniel Cormier is actually a positive for him at age 38 going into this fight.
All right, more from Brett and Ariel coming up in just a few moments as we continue with the official weigh-ins from there. in Las Vegas, getting you set for UFC 260. And of course, we are talking about the main event for obvious reasons, because we do have one of the greatest champions that the UFC's ever seen in the heavyweight division in Stipe Miocic, but also Francis Ngannou, who's trying to become just the third African-born fighter to ever win a UFC title. But he's the favorite, even though he's the contender, because Stipe Miocic, for whatever reason, continues to be overlooked despite everything he's accomplished in the UFC. Before he has a chance to maybe extend his second reign as heavyweight champion, he did sit down with our Ariel Helwani.
I am the best in the world.
You're the heavyweight champ.
Stipe Miocic, he's the best. He's the greatest heavyweight that we've ever seen. He's not just a champion, he's the greatest heavyweight that we've ever seen.
Most decorated heavyweight champion in UFC history.
He has accomplished more than any man that has ever fought in this division.
I mean, I'm not the scariest, I'm the baddest.
When people say to you, baddest man on the planet, I've said it a couple times. Do you wear that proudly, or is that just stuff that the media says?
I'm definitely not the baddest man on the planet in my household. My daughter don't care either. She headbutted me earlier today. I was so mad at her. I was like, why would you do that? You know, man, I'm not the hoopla, but it's kind of cool, you know. And the more and more I think about it, the more I talk about it, it's sweet.
Stipe Miocic has spent 3 years focusing almost exclusively on Daniel Cormier, and to take the last two in this series is just incredible.
The Cormier saga lasted around 2.5 years, right? How happy were you to finally move on and not have to think about him anymore?
Oh, I said it was like a relationship. You're on and you're off. You're on and you're off. He's awesome. He's a great fighter. He's a great ambassador for the sport, like I've always said. I wish him nothing but the best, man. He's a great guy.
You'll probably hear his voice in the middle of your fight, right? I mean, he's going to be calling the fight.
What was I telling him? Like, hey, DC, you shut up now.
And now here you are in another rematch. What's the biggest difference between this Stipe and the one who fought Francis back in 2018?
I'm more efficient. You know, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, you know. I feel like a lot, and I'm getting better every day. And he's gotten better too, you know. He's still young and he's hungry. He wants something that I have. Unfortunately, though, I'm the champ and I'm not giving it up. And you know, he won't be champ until I'm done.
What do you remember about the tension in the cage when you fought him the first time?
Oh, tension back, and I know that, you know, people were looking for a knockout. They wanted my head to go flying out of the cage. But unfortunately, I was not gonna let that happen.
How close was it for this fight to be Jon Jones versus Stipe?
And I'm not gonna choose who I fight. I'm gonna fight who the UFC wants me to fight. They want me to fight Ngannou, so.
Are you excited about the potential fight against Jon if you get by Francis? I know you're probably gonna say I'm focused on Francis. It's gonna be the classic answer, but there's gotta be a part of you that wants that fight, right?
I win on Saturday, yes, but you know, like I said, I'm focusing on Saturday.
Have you thought about how many more years you want to do this for?
Listen, I feel like retiring after every fight since UFC 136. Like, I think about it every fight. Like, once I get there, I'll get there. The minute I'm not having fun, I'm out.
You're having fun now.
I'm having fun.
How do you win on the 27th of March?
You'll find out. You'll definitely see me with my hand raised with the belt still wrapped in the waist and hearing hands still. Nothing's gonna change.
Finish?
Well, of course, we always try for the finish, but you'll find out.
Now, of course, his last bout was against Daniel Cormier. That was August of last year. And with that victory, he tied Randy Couture for the most heavyweight title fight wins in UFC history with 6. If he beats Ngannou on Saturday, he will have that mark all by himself. As we bring Ariel and Brett back in. And Ariel, let me start with you. You know, regardless of sport, sometimes fans get upset that the best in the sport isn't always the biggest star. And that's clearly the case with Stipe Miocic. There have been other heavyweight champions not as accomplished as him to get more attention. You mentioned Brock Lesnar, for example. He's one of the nicest guys you will ever meet, but he's also, you know, the common man's champion too, right? In Northeast Ohio, everyone there in Cleveland loves him because he's just like one of the dudes on the street with the firemen there in Cleveland. But considering how great he has been, why do you think he just doesn't have that overall star appeal?
You know, he reminds me a lot of Kawhi Leonard. Not a big, not a big bashful guy, doesn't puff his chest out, doesn't like to talk smack, but he goes out there and he puts in the work. For the older fans, reminds me a lot of Tim Duncan, right? Not the flashiest guy, doesn't talk smack like a Shaquille O'Neal, but goes in there and is successful and puts in the work. And let's be honest, over the last few years, there was a time where he was not seeing eye to eye with the UFC brass, in large part due to the fact that he wasn't going out there and promoting his fights, in large part due to the fact that he didn't feel like he was getting paid what he was worth. Times have changed, though, Michael. He has a new contract now. He is feeling the love now. He is getting pay-per-view points now. He was not getting pay-per-view points in the past, so there's more of an incentive to go out there and sell his fights. And oh, by the way, you could talk about a 3-fight stretch coming up that could dramatically change the rest of Stipe's life and his family's life as well. This man is 38, so he doesn't have a ton of time left, but we have seen, heavyweights go into their early 40s. But let's talk about this for a second. He could go out there and beat Francis Ngannou for a second time. Massive deal. Imagine he stops him. Holy smokes, now you have a real potential star on your hands. Then we got the Jon Jones fight next. What a big fight that's going to be. You don't even need to go out there and do a press conference for that one. Just Jones versus Stipe, the greatest light heavyweight champion of all time versus the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. I mean, the script writes itself. And then, by the way, when that fight is done, and if he gets by Jon Jones, and I believe he'd actually have an easier time against Jon than he would against Francis tomorrow night, we're staring at a potential now. Don't get crazy. Don't go out there and misquote me, Michael, but a potential fight against Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua. I'm not talking nonsense here. This has already been broached between his camp and the brass. And this is something he wants. When I ask him about that in our interview, his face lights up. I want that fight. I want to prove that I'm the baddest man on the planet, regardless of combat sports. Could you imagine a former Golden Gloves champion in Stipe Miocic goes in there and fights a Fury Joshua, baddest man in MMA versus baddest man in boxing? We're talking about 3 massive fights coming up that he could potentially draw a lot of money for. So I got a sense if he wins this fight, he's going to start promoting himself a little more.
Yeah, the paycheck from that alone would be reason to get out and talk as much as you want. Brett, I wonder your perspective on Stipe as a champion and as a star in the MMA.
Yeah, I think Stipe, Ariel hit the nail on the head. I think his biggest problem is that he just has not liked to promote in the past. And although I share some of Ariel's optimism and that's changing because he sees the need for it and he also sees the incentive for it and he is on better standing with the UFC. Some guys just don't like to promote themselves, and Stipe Miocic is one of them. If you watch the UFC's Embedded show, I think Stipe is arguably the best fighter ever on that show. He's hilarious. He puts himself down in a very, very funny way. He's super, super likable when he's around his family, the jokes he's making with his in-laws and everything else. If you haven't watched Embedded, go and watch Embedded and the ones that Stipe is involved in, and there's a chance that he will become your absolute favorite fighter. This guy is just so, so likable, but it's not in a way that really drums up a ton of interest in his fights. I mean, you just watched an interview that he did with Ariel, and Ariel's asking him, how are you going to finish the fight? He says the same thing every time. I'm going to get my hand raised, nothing's going to change, the belt's going to be around my waist. And for those of us that really appreciate Stipe and know, that he's only coming out of this from a competitive standpoint and just how strong his mental will is when it comes to fights, we appreciate that. But the fans out there that want to hear you say something, I'm going to finish this guy by knockout, I'm going to put a statement on him, I didn't finish him last time, I'm going to finish him this time, that's the kind of stuff the fans like to hear, and Stipe just does not give it to him. He is endearing in his own way, and you ask anybody in this sport, the level of respect that people have in this sport for Stipe Miocic is hard to match. But outside, that's how you really kind of break over into the mainstream, is you say some interesting stuff, and Stipe, he just doesn't like to do it. He doesn't even like, really, quite frankly, giving interviews. He likes Ariel, he likes me, he likes talking to us, but he doesn't really like giving interviews because he knows that we're going to be asking him questions and he's going to be giving us those same answers, and I just don't think that's going to change really moving forward.
The first time I met Stipe was right after he won the championship the first time, and when LeBron was leading the Cavs to the NBA Finals there those 4 years in a row. And we met, we did a SportsCenter hit. We're having breakfast at this restaurant there in Cleveland. Couldn't be a nicer guy. You're like, this is the guy that you want to hang out with from, a sports star to a fan standpoint. But then you think of some of the biggest stars in UFC, typically some guys who just talk trash about everybody. Like, it gets the attention, it brings some tension to the bouts, but in terms of just likability, you guys are right. Like, I enjoy talking to Stipe Miocic. I don't know if I necessarily want to enjoy sitting down with Jon Jones or Conor McGregor for an hour and listen to them talk about themselves or trash talk someone else. Maybe Israel Adesanya is the same way in that regard, but those are the biggest names in the sport. Ariel, Stipe, and Brett mentioned it, just the respect. For him, he clearly values the respect of his peers in the game way more than he would necessarily how many hits he would get on social media, on the gram or on Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm not ready to give up on Stipe being a draw. He reminds me to a certain degree of George St. Pierre in the sense that GSP didn't like to talk smack. He didn't like to ruffle feathers. He was the guy who, wore the suit all the time and was very respectful. No real difference here. Stipe even makes fun of himself that he's not the most eloquent speaker. But let me tell you something, Michael. Like, it is very easy to promote Conor McGregor. It is very easy to promote Israel Adesanya. They take all the responsibility away from the promotion. You got to be a little more creative with Stipe. But guess what? He gives you a lot to work with too. The firefighter stuff is great. I know that story has been told, but quite frankly, you can't tell it enough. The picture of him scrubbing the toilet 2 days after winning a heavyweight title fight, I mean, that's great stuff. And then, when has Stipe ever been in a boring fight? Can you name one? The Francis Ngannou fight wasn't boring, if you ask me. Tied for the most, fight night bonuses in heavyweight history. The guy is fun. The guy, as Brett said, when he's away from the cameras, he is entertaining. He's one of the best guys on Embedded. The key is, for us, for the media, you have to know who you're working with here. And so he doesn't like to talk about the upcoming fight or a potential fight or drama with the UFC. But hey, ask him about something outside of the sport. Ask him about his beloved Browns. Ask him about Cleveland baseball. Ask him about Fury and Joshua. His face lights up like a Christmas tree. So you just have to know who you're working with.
Yeah.
I want to see the baddest man on the planet compete. If all you care about are, press conferences and sound bites, then maybe this whole thing isn't for you. If you can't appreciate Stipe for who he is, I question your MMA fandom.
There you go. And that's a really good point, because it is about the fights. It is about the performance. It is about what these dudes do in the cage. And in the history of this division, no one has done quite what Stipe Miocic has done. So with that said, Brett, what are you expecting from him in this rematch on Saturday?
I mean, I thought that his last performance against Daniel Cormier was arguably the greatest performance of his career, which is incredible to say, because he is not getting any younger. Heavyweight has shown that you can have success into your late 30s, early 40s. I mean, DC and Stipe were just fighting to really kind of almost declare who the greatest heavyweight of all time was, and DC was on the plus side of 40, and Stipe was 37. So I was surprised by Stipe's performance and just how good it was, how detailed it was, how dialed in he was against Daniel Cormier. I'm expecting a similar type of performance here. But like I said right from the beginning, it does not surprise me that Francis Ngannou is the favorite, because Ngannou, from the moment he's walked into the UFC, he's been looked at as a guy who just has an amount of potential that you just can't replicate. He has potential to not only, I think, beat Stipe, but then go on a long run. DC talked about it on his show with Ariel, that this is a guy who could not only capture the imagination of the non-hardcore fans, but also do it for a sustained amount of time. He is that level of the talent. So you're talking about a guy in Francis who has a lot of mental willpower, a ton of physical attributes, and if he's put it all together over the last 2 years, in which we've seen him fight, but we haven't seen him fight for long, I do think he is the right favorite in all of this. But I'm expecting a very, very good, a very, very good version of Stipe Miocic, because we just saw a great version of him back in August.
All right, more from Ariel and Brett coming up a little bit later. Again, still waiting for Miocic and Ngannou to step to the scales there at UFC Apex. But there is the co-main event at UFC 260 that's getting a lot of attention as well, because it features a former champion in Tyron Woodley, who could be having his last fight in the UFC if he can't stop this current losing streak that he's riding right now. And Ariel had a chance to sit down with him recently as well to get his mindset into going into Saturday night.
I can win this fight and stick around the UFC and still not compete. My friend Len Odie told me a really, really good quote. He said, be performance-centric. Think about performance. Don't think about title fights. Don't think about what's next. Don't think about if I do this, then that. Just be performance-centric. Think about performance. And I have a hard time believing that if I go out there and I perform to the level that I'm capable, that anybody's going to beat me in the welterweight division. I just don't believe that. So I think it's do or die for myself. I'm tired of going out there and watching myself allow people that, in my opinion, didn't belong in the cage with me, let alone being able to defeat me, win, and have a victory and have my name on their resume and, have a victory over me that really solidified them. Look at Gilbert, Colby, Usman. I'm the strongest win on their record. I'm the most solidified victory on their record. They can say whatever they want, but when you look at them, without me on their record, it's not They're not up for title shots. They don't have a belt around their waist, less known fighting for one. So it's time for me to go out there and just remember that I'm their biggest fight. I'm Vicente's biggest fight of his career. I need to make them my biggest fight.
Now, Woodley enters Saturday having lost his last 3 bouts, the first of which cost him his welterweight belt. Losses have come against some of the top names in the division, but the 3-fight losing streak, though, also the longest of his career. We send it back to Las Vegas right now. More on that in a moment, but there we have the heavyweight champion, Ariel, Stipe Miocic, stepping to the scale.
Yes, with about 66 minutes left in the weigh-ins, Michael. Here he is, the baddest man on the planet, the king of the heavyweights, pride of Ohio, Stipe Miocic. It's the big one right here.
234 pounds. 234, the official weight for the champion, Stipe Miocic.
You hear right there from John Anik, 234. A lot closer to the weight he had prior to the Cormier fight. 12 pounds lighter than he was the first time he fought Francis Ngannou. And if Chael Sonnen were here, I think he would say he's a little bit concerned, because he told me on Wednesdays, Ariel the Bad Guy, that he feels like Stipe should be 240 or above in order to be as strong as he can be, to use his wrestling to go up there to Ngannou. What do you make of that, Brett? I know I asked you about the weight prior to this, but are you at all surprised that he's coming in at 234 for this fight, considering how much he weighed in the first fight and the success that he had in that first fight?
Yeah, I leave the analysis mostly to Chael. It's very rare that I'll disagree with him when it comes to the X's and O's, but I think the fact that he's coming in at this lighter weight is similar to the reason why he came in at a lighter weight against DC, and that's speed. And I don't think that speed is a bad thing when you're fighting Francis Ngannou. That guy is lightning quick. And as I mentioned before, even though Stipe took several shots from him back in 2018, you don't want to do that again. So I think that Stipe probably, especially being in there and wrestling Francis the way he did 3 years ago, he's probably thinking to himself, I can wrestle this guy weighing 230 pounds. I don't know if I can get out of the way of his punches weighing 240 pounds. So I like it. I like the fact that he came in here light, the same weight that he fought DC, because as I mentioned, just moments ago, I thought that his performance against DC in that third fight, right back in August, was arguably the best performance of his career. So I like the fact that he's still at that weight.
I agree with you on that. I also agree with your assessment of his last performance. I think it was one of the most impressive of his career. And I do recall it's been quite some time that we were kind of talking about the same thing. Oh, is he too light for DC? He's a big guy. He's a wrestler. And look how it turned out. Now, Francis is a completely different fighter, different skill set, different game plan. But I'm not as bothered about this. Weight was a big issue in the last pay-per-view main event that we saw between Israel Adesanya and Jan Blachowicz. I don't think it's the same. Like, I think there could be someone at home saying, wait a second, he's under 240. Are you guys afraid that Francis is going to take down Stipe? I'm not. I think the problem is, does he have enough muscle? Does he have enough weight on him in order to use his wrestling, which he's much better at, against Francis? I don't think 6, 7 or so pounds is going to make all that big of a difference. And he's probably going to add a few come now and Friday. So I actually like a leaner Stipe. I like a quicker Stipe, especially against the Francis who's going to come at him full force. I'm honestly not that bothered about all this. Now, we haven't seen Francis yet. I expect him to be 260 or above, 261, 262, 263. So there's going to be a considerable size difference, around 30 or so pounds. But I just don't see how Francis uses that to his advantage like people are thinking. I don't think he's going to wrestle. Let me set the line at 1. 1 takedown attempt for Francis Ngannou. Taking the over or the under?
You know what? I'm going to take the over. I'm going to believe what his team has said, that he has really embraced the wrestling. But, there's a lot of different reasons why you could want to potentially take a shot in 25 minutes. So I think that I will take the over on that, but I'm not supremely confident. Of course, the bigger point is that Francis is coming in looking to knock out Stipe Miocic. He's not coming in looking to wrestle him. That is not the game plan. Maybe it'll be something that he does try in the middle of the fight because, like I said, his team is very, very confident that he has to become a full mixed martial artist, where he maybe was not in 2018. But, of course, the point is that his game plan is to stand and put Stipe out the way in which he's finished his last 4 opponents.
All right, guys, go back to that first matchup. You talk about the weight differential between Stipe now and what he was against Ngannou. 12 pounds lighter, Ariel, as you mentioned. We expect Ngannou to be about 260 pounds. Clearly, that's a big difference. But also, maybe Stipe, the way he fought Cormier at that weight, as you guys mentioned, he says, you know what, I can do that as well against Ngannou. And again, maybe that's also indicative of the strategy we may see from Miocic, Brett, in this rematch based on the fact that he is 12 pounds lighter than the first time.
Yeah, a lot of times, I remember Frank Mir talking about this years ago, that, because he would bounce around in weight. He would go all the way up to 265, then he'd go down to 246, and I think he went back to 265 later on after he lost a couple fights. But it's not necessarily always about the opponent. It's which weight do you fight best at? And in heavyweight, you have the luxury of choosing what that is for you. At all these other weights, these guys obviously step on the scale. They got to weigh the exact same. I think that they're at heavyweight. Different guys will find different weights that work best for them. And I think with Stipe, maybe it has to do with adjustments he wanted to make against DC, and now he's carrying that over to Francis. But I also think that it's just the weight that he wants to fight at comfortably. And now we get to see the other half of this main event.
Yes, there he is. The always chiseled, the always fit Francis Ngannou. His second crack at UFC gold. Says he doesn't even recognize the guy who fought Stipe back in January of 2018. What a run he is on. 4 straight wins, none of them longer than 71 seconds. One of the most intimidating fighters in the history of the sport, one of the hardest hitting fighters in the history of the sport. There he is on the scale, looking to be, once again, in phenomenal shape.
263 pounds, the official weight for Francis Ngannou.
So no difference in Francis's weight.
Main event is official.
From the first fight, he was 263 back in January of 2018 in Boston. He's 263 once again, and so that means if my math is correct, that is a 29-pound difference. I was never great at math, but I do believe I'm right on that one. 29-pound difference between challenger Francis Ngannou, who just weighed in at 263, and champion Stipe Miocic, who weighed in just seconds ago at 234. And as I said earlier, Stipe still the underdog going into this fight, as opposed to Francis, who is the favorite for the second straight time against Stipe as well. Do you suspect, another thing that Chael said, Brett, was that he thought the line would change regardless of if Stipe is 240 or above or 240 and under. Of course, he's under. We just found out he thought the line would dramatically change as a result of today's weigh-in, which doesn't always happen. Do you think he's right about that?
That's crazy. I was literally sitting here watching Francis on the scale, and I was thinking that to myself, that people are going to see this and the line is going to move in Francis's favor, because he is just such an intimidating figure. And we keep talking about how, hey, he weighs the same that he did in 2018, 263 pounds. You can be a different person and still weigh the same. And I think I see that in Francis. I think that he knew that he got tired in that fight. He knew that, I think a lot of that was mental, a lot of it was adrenaline dump, but I also think that he has fine-tuned his training in terms of just cardiovascularly as well. And so just because he weighs 263, I think it's a different 263. He's leaner than he was in 2018. I would love it, and maybe our social team can do this, to just grab screenshots of him in 2018 and now. Even though he weighs the same, I think we're going to see a little bit of difference in him, and I think we're going to see a difference in his performance too. I don't know if the guy's going to be able to go 5 rounds with Stipe Miocic, but I do think his cardio is going to be a lot better than it was in 2018.
Division 10th ranked Vicente Luque.
Amazing looking at Francis in the distance there. Like, you could see the muscles just like bulging out. The shadows are incredible. An absolute specimen. For now, though, let's say hello to Vicente Luque, who's fighting in the co-main event against Tyron Woodley. Massive fight, as Woodley said, the biggest fight of Luque's career. Did have a loss to Stephen Thompson at MSG in 2019. Since then, he's won his last 2 in a row.
170 and 1/2 pounds, the official weight for Vicente Luque.
All right, so Luque makes weight 170.5 pounds. We have yet to see Tyron Woodley. We've seen the 2 main eventers. I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I believe we have 5 fighters left after Luque just made weight. No one has missed weight, so that is good news. 15 have successfully stepped on that scale. 5 more to go, but they do have quite a bit of time. They've got 56 minutes from right now. The 5 fighters remaining: Woodley, Worthy, Charent, Gooden, and Gordon, and Omar Morales.
Right?
Yeah, he is the last one. We heard from Tyron Woodley earlier, and it's interesting when you look at the losing streak, Brett. You have a guy who's lost 3 in a row, longest losing streak of his career, only 3-fight losing streak of his career. But then you remember, all right, he fought Kamaru Usman, he fought Gilbert Burns, he fought Colby Covington, arguably the 3 best welterweights right now in the UFC. None of those fights were really close, but the feeling that I think we all had after those fights were the old Tyron wasn't there. Like, he didn't show up. It wasn't like he lost a close fight. It wasn't like he lost a barn burner. It wasn't like he got knocked out. It just kind of felt like he never was able to go into that next gear. Do you feel like against a maybe lesser competitor, a guy who's a top 15 guy, but 10 to 15 perhaps, do you feel like he'll take it into that next gear, or do you think this is just a sign of a guy who's approaching 39 years young? I mean, he's turning 39 next month. This happens when you get older in the fight game.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't think this is disrespectful to say it. At this point, you can't expect that out of Tyron Woodley. You know that it's probably still in there somewhere, but when you've seen him compete now in 15 rounds, and I'll have to say, just personally and honestly, when I've watched Tyron compete in those fights, I don't even know if compete is the right word. I think that he accepted defeat in some of them. I think that he was looking to survive and not take damage, and hey, God bless him. I mean, I think any of us, going in there, this is not basketball, it's not baseball. You take serious damage if you go in there and put it on the line. I don't think Tyron has really necessarily been this guy that has gone out on his shield. I think that he's played it safe, and he has, again, accepted defeat because he knew that, hey, it's no secret to anybody. You're down in this fight, man. Go. Try to win this. We've heard Dean Thomas. I've had conversations with Dean, his longtime head coach, and he has expressed the same frustration. We all want to see Tyron go for it, but I think when he hasn't done it now for 15 consecutive rounds, you got to expect that to continue, that he will not go out there and put it all on the line against Vicente Luque. Could he prove that wrong? 100%, and we all hope that he does. We hope that we see a guy in there who looks like he wants to be in there, but at this point going into Saturday, I feel like I think a lot of the people do watching this, that it's Vicente Luque's fight to lose until Tyron, shows us otherwise.
Yeah, and I think some people look at Luque's record and say, all right, 19-7-1. Not the greatest record, solid, but, no world beater. But then you dig a little deeper, and since his debut, which he lost back in 2015, his only 2 losses in the UFC were to Leon Edwards back in 2017. We know how good Leon is, and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He's beaten everyone else, and he is as tough as they come, doesn't shy away from a fight. He is aggressive. He is going to bring the fight to Tyron Woodley. And so if the same Tyron Woodley shows up tomorrow, same guy as the one who just fought Colby or Gilbert Burns or Kamaru Usman, he could be in trouble. Now, his team doesn't want to talk about his future just yet, but I'm told he's either on the last fight of his deal or very close to the last fight of his deal. You look at the landscape right now, you read the tea leaves, you look at the fact that Alistair Overeem, was given his walking papers, Junior Dos Santos, Anthony Pettis, they essentially let him leave the company, Yoel Romero. Tyron Woodley kind of fits the mold of the former champion / former contender who's getting up there in age, who's, maybe not as good as he once was, who isn't able to beat those top contenders, the kind of guy that the UFC is parting ways with. So this is as big of a they're all must-wins, right? You fight for the belt, it's a must-win. But this is as big of a must-win at this stage of Tyron Woodley's career that he is ever going to see. And I feel comfortable in saying if he doesn't win this fight, I would be very surprised if he fights in the UFC ever again. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're correct for all the reasons that you laid out. And what's unfortunate about it is that, and hey, this happens in this sport. We talk about it, that when the end comes, it comes very, very quickly at times, just because of how vicious this sport can be. But with Tyron, I mean, when the guy went in and when he fought Kamaru Usman, I picked him to win that fight. We were talking about him in the same way that we're talking about Kamaru now, and that he was laying the landscape of challenging George St. Pierre as the greatest welterweight of all time. And then to go from that, and then all of a sudden just bang in a split second. And it's not, a Chuck Liddell situation where the guy can't take a punch anymore. He just doesn't look like he wants to be out there. He doesn't look like when it's time to dig deep and go for something, there's nothing there for Tyron Woodley. So I think that's been the most frustrating part for people, whether they were fans of him or not. He was a polarizing figure when he was a champion, but again, with the people who are involved in the sport and watch it and had a high level of respect for the competitor that Woodley was, and then to see that just kind of disappear overnight has been very frustrating.
What do you think Tyron Woodley's legacy is going to be if this is in fact his last fight in the UFC? Because I feel like there was so much drama when he was champion, it has kind of clouded those big wins, right? The Robbie Lawler win, the Darren Till win, the fights against Stephen Thompson. He was criticized for the Maya fight, even though I don't think it was necessarily his fault. I don't know if history is going to remember, people like to make fun of the rap songs and all that stuff. Like, this was a really good fighter who had really big wins even before becoming champion against the Robbie Lawlers of the world, Carlos Condit, Kelvin Gaston when he missed weight. What do you think his legacy is ultimately going to be in the UFC?
I think people like you and I, Ariel, and the people who are hardcore fans of this sport and who watched Tyron come up and who were aware of what he did, even there were always little elements in there, and some of those title defenses that he was ridiculed for, that he suffered an injury early on in the Damian Maia fight that had an impact on his performance. The Wonderboy Thompson fights, those are tricky fights that you can't just run forward and look to knock somebody out. You got to play a little bit of a chess match, and I still look back on those fights as some of the best performances of Woodley's career, even though people would say I'm crazy for that. I think that he did what he needed to do to win those fights, and Tyron Woodley was always very good at that. He was calculated, he was smart, he knew how to expend his energy, he always had a good game plan. So I hold him in that high regard, but I do think that history, when it looks back on Tyron, unfortunately, it is going to overlook a lot of what made him great because of the fact that he had some title defenses that were looked at as not very entertaining, and quite frankly, because of the way he's ending his career. It looks like so far. I mean, he still has a chance to change that narrative, but if he continues down this road that he's been on over the last couple of years, I think that's going to have a big impact on his legacy, and history is not going to remember him in the same way that maybe you and I do.
All right, guys, more from Brett and Ariel in a moment. Again, we're still waiting for Woodley to step to the scale there in Vegas to see what he will weigh in for his bout coming up on UFC 260 main card. Another interesting fight on this card, though, centers around Sean O'Malley, who had a very up and down year, to say the least, in 2020. In August, he suffered his first career loss and what he considers to be a fluke. In November, he became a father for the first time. So with more than just himself to fight for as motivation, how will O'Malley approach this bout coming up Saturday night? Let's find out.
Elena Louise, we had her 4 months ago today when I was in fight camp in Danny. She made a cake and put blueberries and spelled out Dad October. And she's like, read it. I'm like, I can't. I just like, let me just eat it. She's like, just read it. She was recording me. I'm like, what are you doing? And I seen it and I was just like, my heart stopped. It was the craziest feeling. It was like, no way.
Give me like a slow tempo set with Elena weight. She's like the perfect weight right there.
16
It's just funny seeing her every morning. It's impossible to have any other feeling other than just like joy and love when they smile and drool, and even when she's pooping, it's just like the cutest thing. Everything she does is cute.
We'll give Elena her first taste of some daddy lunges. Yeah! There you go. I think she needs to go that way. What's she weighing?
16 pounds.
16 pounds right there. She's so cute.
I feel like everybody kind of looks at him like he's this crazy guy that has face tattoos. It's worked out with Daddy. He's very loving. It makes my heart tickle every time they're together.
2020, I know, is a tough year for a lot of people, but it was the best year of my life, hands down. Being a dad is the coolest experience I've ever had. As a fighter, being a father hasn't really changed me. It's the same goal, be world champion, and now that I have a baby girl, it doesn't change that.
It's good.
There was no lack of motivation for me. It's not like I can get more motivated. I'm not trying to be world champ for her or for Danny. I'm trying to be world champ for myself. I'm gonna be the champ someday, and it's gonna be all worth it.
You can find out more about O'Malley, Part 1, UFC Destin, exclusively right now on ESPN+. There you see on the right side of your screen, Kama Worthy making way for his lightweight bout against Jamie Malarkey. And you also saw Omar Morales. Of course, he's got a featherweight bout against Shane Young. He made his weight as well. As we bring back in Ariel and Brett to the conversation, you know, look, O'Malley came to the UFC with all kind of flair. I mean, it wasn't just the hair, but also the way he fought. He was just exciting to see. And then he loses his last bout, and he says it's a fluke. Ariel, earlier you said you don't consider it a fluke, but if you get hit in your funny bone and all of a sudden your foot doesn't work anymore, that's not a fluke in your mind?
No, not at all. And look, I want to give Sean O'Malley the benefit of the doubt here. I want to believe that he doesn't actually believe the things that he is saying. I want to believe that he knows Chito Vera is a really good fighter who beat him fair and square. He is saying that Chito hit a nerve and thus it was a fluke. He got dead leg, and you know, sometimes these things happen. Chito Vera won that fight fair and square. To say this, like you could say, oh, go-go platas don't happen often in MMA, so when someone pulls one off every 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, is that a fluke? No. I mean, it's just a unique thing. Same with spinning back kicks. You know, we're seeing the end result here, but stuff had to happen, attack had to happen, damage had to happen for him to have that kind of impact. So I hope that he is not dismissing the loss. I hope he didn't take the loss as a lesson to where he can learn things off of. I hope he truly doesn't view himself as undefeated, because if he does, I mean, it's going to be a problem. You know, this reminds me a little bit of when Ronda Rousey returned to fight Amanda Nunes after her fight against Holly Holm, her first pro loss. And it felt to me when she fought Amanda Nunes that she wasn't over the loss to Holly Holm, that wound was still very big. The scab had not fully healed. And when I hear Sean talking this way, it makes me think the same thing, that he is not fully over the loss, and thus there could be some issues that will come to light on Saturday. Now, Thomas Almeida isn't Amanda Nunes. Sean O'Malley's still very young. He's still in his prime. I suspect we're going to see a really good Sean O'Malley. I am just trying to maybe ignore some of the things that he is saying, because everything that he is saying should give us pause. I'd like to think that he is smarter than the things that he is saying.
All right, so Ariel, here's the difference, though, in your Ronda Rousey analogy. Holly Holm kicked her in the face and knocked her out, okay? Where in O'Malley's mind, whether he's right or wrong, in his mind, his leg stopped working. And that's a little bit different from a fighter's mindset to say, did this dude really beat me, or did something happen where I could not perform? Now, was it caused by my opponent? Absolutely. But it's like, yo, my leg just stopped working. That doesn't make sense. So, Brett, based on O'Malley's mindset, or at least what he's saying, whether he believes everything he's saying publicly or not, what are you expecting from him in his return to the octagon, considering how he lost his last bout?
I'm expecting a lot of confidence. I think I agree with you, Michael. I actually like the fact that Sean is saying this, and I think it's kind of a healthy thing. To me, Ronda's inability to accept that showed a lack of confidence. I think in her mind she knew what happened in that fight, but she just couldn't accept it. I think Sean is like, yeah, okay, the guy beat me. I mean, there is a 1 on my record. I'm not crazy. I look at my record, there's a 1 there. But the reason I'm saying I'm undefeated is because I don't feel like I lost. You know, and that concept makes sense to me. And I've spent time with Sean O'Malley, and he's not a dumb guy. He's very, very smart. He's very cerebral. He's a deep thinker. And I think in his mind, he even said it himself. He said, I'll give someone credit someday. I probably will get beat. You know, I will get legitimately beat in this sport. That happens to everybody, but I just don't feel like it happened in my last fight. And I don't think he's even necessarily saying that to to discredit or to throw shade at Chito Vera. I know that Chito Vera has kind of taken it that way, which I think any of us would. But I get the mindset that Sean O'Malley's coming in with, and so I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a fight. You know, we always talk about this guy's undefeated. The mindset that he has, he doesn't know how to lose. He's just got a lot of confidence. We talk about that all the time in this sport. When there is a person who has made it to this level in the UFC and then is still having that undefeated record, it really means a lot, and it really gives you a sort of an air of invincibility. And I think that even though technically he lost his last fight, that air of invincibility is still with Sean O'Malley. So I actually look at it as a really healthy thing. It doesn't hurt that it makes a lot of people angry. It's almost like he's trolling a lot of people, but I don't think he's trolling. I think he actually means that in my heart, I don't feel like I lost yet. And so I'm going to keep calling myself undefeated.
And so you see, this is crazy to me because, again, I don't want to confuse people. I have the utmost respect for this guy. People have said I have hyped him up. I think he's great. I think he's going to win this fight. But first of all, he is calling himself undefeated. He is ignoring the laws. He is not accepting it. He is now saying that Marlon Vera is afraid of him, that Marlon Vera wouldn't want to fight him again. You don't think Marlon Vera wants to take that fight? And oh, by the way, we've all seen this. Guy gets hit like right there. Guy gets hit like right here very lightly, and they fall. Is that a fluke? No. The dead leg, if you will, came as a result of kicks to that leg. It didn't just happen because he stubbed his toe. Like, Marlon Vera deserves all the credit for what happened there. So he could be saying this to us. It's a great talking point. It's nice fodder leading up to the fight. But if he truly believes that that was just a fluke and does no adjustments, because I'll tell you what, Thomas Almeida watched that fight. Thomas Almeida is going to try to do the same thing to his leg on Saturday night. If he's made no adjustments, if he has seriously not watched that and learned something from that loss, then I think that could be a major problem for young Sean O'Malley come Saturday.
Hey, Ariel, what you say is a good point, clearly. In combat sports, if I'm allowed to kick you and damage happens as a result, then I should get credit for that damage being done to my opponent. I'm just saying I can understand why O'Malley would think he didn't lose or he didn't get beat because he withstood those kicks and then he went to step and his leg didn't work. So in his mind, my leg stopped working, not this dude beat me. I'm not saying what he's saying is accurate, but I understand the mentality from a fighter standpoint going into his next bout. But as you said, Almeida's not Vera, okay? So what do you make of the matchup itself between O'Malley and Almeida coming up Saturday night with O'Malley trying to get back on track as he was prior to that loss?
Yeah, I think it's a great matchup. I think it's a very winnable fight for Sugar. If I'm being honest, it's a fight tailor-made for him to win because Almeida's on a bit of a losing streak, like I said earlier, and Sean is someone that they've invested a lot of time and money in, and he could be a very, very big star. Good style matchup. It will likely, be on the feed for the majority of the fight. Maybe Almeida throws a curveball here or there, but this is a fight that was made to get Sean O'Malley over. I'll just add this one other thing, by the way, I get it as well because fighters, sometimes I try to put myself in a fighter's shoe. I can never be as courageous or as somewhat crazy as a fighter. They step into a cage with 4-ounce gloves and lock the door behind them. I don't possess that courage. I don't possess that DNA. And so if I try to understand why he's acting this way, I'll remind myself, and as I told him, you're not me. You're much braver than I am. You have a thing in your body that allows you to do this and deal with losses that way. So far be it from me to criticize him. I'm just saying, this is how I feel about his comments going into the fight. Alas, I digress. Here's Tyron Woodley stepping on the scale for perhaps the final time. I have confirmed, by the way, this is the final fight on his UFC contract.
171 even. 171 pounds, the official weight for T. Wood.
So there you see it. Tyron Woodley makes weight. That means there are only 2 fighters left. But this is big, Brett. Tyron Woodley, to piggyback on your point and the question that I asked you, I don't feel like he gets the love that he deserves. I don't feel like we look at his resume with the same kind of respect and admiration that he deserves. He was on a roll. He's a guy who's in, his late 30s now, still very much a player at 170, despite the fact that he's on that 3-fight losing streak. I think he's one of the, when we talk now about Usman, we talk about GSP, of course. Woodley's in that conversation with Usman. Usman, in my opinion, hasn't surpassed Woodley yet. He's not in the GSP conversation. Usman's now in the Woodley conversation with Pat Miocic and Matt Hughes. That's how good Tyron Woodley was. But, Brett, I'm being honest here. I feel like win or lose on Saturday, this could be the end. I don't think it should be, but just reading the tea leaves, based on the fact that Dana White said in December, hey, we're going to get rid of 30 to 40 or so fighters, given the names that they've gotten rid of over the past couple months, even with a win, and this now being the final fight on his contract, and given his history with the UFC brass, I'd be very surprised if they bring him back even with a win. Unless it's something truly spectacular that they can't ignore, I'd be surprised. What about you?
Which is maybe okay. You know, we talk about this sometimes, these fighters who depart the UFC and go somewhere else as if it's, you know, this really, really terrible thing. Quite frankly, at this point in Tyron's career, it might be better for him to go somewhere else. You know, he might have you know, different but better opportunities with a different promotion. You know, we all know what the UFC is. We know what their strategy is. We know what their matchmaking process is like. We know that what their schedule is, and when they need somebody, they need them now, and this and that. And I think Tyron potentially has reached a point in his career where you remove some of those factors, and you let this guy compete against maybe some different individuals or some different circumstances. You know, and just some other opportunities that come along with some of these other promotions. Maybe it'll be quite just a better fit for Tyron Woodley at this point in his career. So I'm with you. I'm looking at this fight as most likely, particularly if you've been told it's the final fight of his contract definitively. Yeah, it's most likely the last time we'll see Tyron Woodley in the UFC. But like I just said, I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it does seem, and not putting this in a negative way, it does seem like maybe that relationship has run its course. Tyron Woodley was a champion. He's no longer one. And if he wants to continue fighting somewhere else, I think that maybe that would even be best for him.
This, Ariel and Brett both, because you mentioned it, how that we view Woodley in this division now compared to GSP and now with Usman. What impact, Brett, let me start with you, do you think that the view of Woodley has been impacted by these two things going opposite direction? One, he's lost 3 fights in a row, and Usman, the current champion, has won 13 in a row. In terms of, we're so focused on what Usman is doing as the current champion and the run that he's had since he started UFC, that it's causing us not to pay attention to the overall body of work of Woodley, because he's lost these 3 fights in a row coming into Saturday night.
Michael, you're exactly right. We in this sport, we have very, very, very short memories, and we even admit it. You know, you're only as good as your last fight. Right. We say that all the time. You know, and that is true in this case. And you're absolutely right, because of what Kamaru is doing. And we shouldn't point out that I think the UFC has gotten behind Kamaru in a way in which they really didn't with Tyron Woodley. You know, Dana White had some differences with Kamaru early on, but it was really after, you know, Dana will even say this, it was after he fought Rafael dos Anjos, and he said, that's the guy that I want as my welterweight champion. That type of finisher mentality, the type of mentality that just Kamaru has, Dana White really got behind Kamaru in a way that he never got behind Tyron. I mean, if anything, he put down Tyron's performances. So I think that always kind of had an impact on the credit that Tyron was given. Of course, when you've got Dana White, the biggest star arguably that the UFC has, even bigger than the fighters, and he's constantly saying that he wasn't impressed by Tyron's performances. And then of course Tyron he was irked by that, of course, and so the relationship wasn't great for a long time. So I think it's an astute point by you that he deserves to be right up there with the George St. Pierre, the Kamaru Usman, the Matt Hughes. But I do think over time he will struggle to be in that conversation, and I think a lot of that has to do with his downfall and then also the rise of Kamaru at the very same time.
I'm old enough to remember when Dana White invited Tyron Woodley to his son's birthday party, the only fighter who was in attendance. I'm old enough to remember when they went to the Super Bowl together many moons ago. So this relationship at one point was pretty strong, but clearly it's not in the same spot that it is in right now. And again, you have to look at the last 3 guys that he fought. Those 3 guys are really, really good. The top 3 best, arguably, certainly the champion, Kamaru Usman, is in that conversation, but even Colby and of course Gilbert Burns, who just fought for the belt. I mean, that's a really tough group of guys to fight at this stage of his career. Now that we know it's the final fight on his deal, you have to think about the pressure, right? You got the pressure of the 3-fight losing streak. You got the pressure of trying to remind people that you're still a very good fighter, that you're still a force at 170, and you got the pressure of your future. And I'm not even talking about your UFC future, but who wants to go into free agency on a 4-fight losing streak? Who wants to go, you know, and especially if it's the kind of performance that we've seen as of late, you know, there's not going to be a lot of suitors, but could you imagine if he knocks out a Vicente Luque, like he did back in the day, a Josh Koscheck, or, you know, a Jay Haran, a name, you know, like an emphatic, a Robbie Lawler, like an emphatic finish like that. Think about the suitors then. And so there's a lot at stake here for Tyron Woodley, more than I think we all knew there was at stake 2 hours ago. And so as a result of all that, he says he has stripped everything away. There are no distractions. He's not doing any side projects as of right now. He trained a little bit with Antonio McKee in California, who's a great up-and-coming coach with a great young team there. I am really curious to see, given the losing streak, given how he's looked as of late, and now given the fact that he's on the final fight of his deal, how Tyron responds to all of this and how he looks on Saturday against Vicente Luque. I mean, obviously we wanted to see that title fight between Ortega and Volkanovski, but this is a really, really intriguing co-main event fight tomorrow night.
Yeah, he's a plus 200 favorite. As you mentioned, this may be his biggest fight since he won the belt for the very first time. More for Ariel and Brett coming up a little bit later. But, of course, the heavyweights will be on display at UFC 260. And in this episode of Unlocking Victory, Dominic Cruz and Gilbert Melendez take a look at what happened in that first matchup between Stipe Miocic and Francis Ngannou, along with what could be different this time around.
Ngannou is a very big puncher, especially in the first round. How many people has he knocked out in the first round? How careful do you need to be? Well, Stipe had a perfect game plan. What he did well is he just waited for the big punches, the 1-2s basics, and he kept his feet moving early. It wasn't real fancy. It was just circling to the weak side, being the lead hand side, so that when the right hand came, he could be out of the way. And it was also making sure when the 1-2-3 came that he's going under the hook and keeping his feet moving. By keeping his feet moving and moving backwards, pulling Ngannou, he could kind of see the punches while they were coming and get out of the way. Then, as he's pulling, he's able to time this head on the outside, single leg, dump, 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 and re-grab this double and drive him over to the fence.
So what we want to see from Francis Ngannou is, of course, at the beginning, straight 1-2s, right? But when I start throwing a 1-2, he's going to kind of slip and roll, boom, right? When you start seeing that 1-2 against Francis Ngannou, you need to get out of the way. So now I'm going to use my right uppercut instead of the 2. So 1, 2, there's my right uppercut. And even if you don't land the uppercut, you're still there to underhook him and defend the takedown. So I do it, 1, he shoots, 2, boom, I'm here to double to get my underhooks in and to neutralize that takedown. Now am I gonna wrestle him? No, I'm gonna get out. We don't want to go berserker. We don't want to throw 5 punches at Stipe Miocic. Why? Because he's gonna lower his level and take me down.
Ngannou gets right to pressure early, and he just keeps it moving. He caught a couple uppercuts being on the way in, but he ate them, kept his feet moving, stayed composed, back in on the single, back in on the double. Beautiful time takedown. Once Stipe gets him to here, he chases him to the fence, keeps on him, hangs on him here. And then what you see him do so well is he'll get over the top of his head and just shove it down.
So what I want to do is I want to slide my hips forward. I want to step and I want to slide my hips forward and I want to stand up here. I'm here, it's hard for me to get up this way. He's pushing my head down, there's too much weight. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my hands to explode up, I'm gonna slide forward and I'm gonna step up, boom. This is a wrestling stand-up. Now I'm gonna use my hands to control his, stand up here, lean back, and now I could turn into him and escape.
When Ngannou does get up and get away, there's a little bit less in these punches. They don't knock you out anymore, and at the same time, he's thinking about this shot, so he's being choosy with what he decides to throw.
Oh, good right hand by Stipe. Beautiful.
Well, folks, we want to invite all of you at home to make your picks and challenge your friends for a chance to win $5,000 with ESPN's UFC 260 Pick'em game. To play for free, go to ESPN.com/UFC Pick'em and make your picks right now. Matter of fact, fans can make winner picks in every single matchup on the card. But for now, we only have Ariel and Brett, so we'll use them for our picks here on the weigh-in show. Ariel, let me start with you. First question, will any of the main card fights end via submission?
Oh, wow. Look at this question. Michael, I mean, this is a curveball.
Yes.
I was ready for something completely different. Main event, no. Co-main event, no. Almeida, O'Malley, Julian Robertson. Okay, yeah, sure. I'll say yes.
Okay, so one at least by submission. Brett, how do you see it?
Yeah, I'm going to go with one, and I think the most likely one is probably that women's fight. Which, by the way, usually, you know, sometimes on the show we talk about what's the undercard fight that you're looking forward to the most.
Yeah.
Julian Robertson versus Miranda Maverick might be mine. That is a great fight, and I could see it ending in submission.
All right, let's turn to the main event. Everyone's worried about this one. Of course, the last one went 5 rounds, unanimous decision by Miocic to retain his heavyweight championship. Over, under 2.5 rounds. Ariel.
Over.
Okay. Brett?
I win.
Brett, can you still hear us?
Yeah. I think we lost you for a second, or I lost you guys.
Okay.
I couldn't hear it. Was
Over,
that
under,
then? Over
2.5
on the heavyweight.
Yeah, 2.5 rounds. Over, under.
Yeah, I'm going to go over, which sounds crazy because Francis has been finishing fights in less than a minute. So to say it's going to go 12.5 minutes is really going out on a limb. But I think if you want to beat the greatest heavyweight of all time, you're going to have to be in there longer than 12.5 minutes.
Well, and that's the thing about Stipe, what he showed throughout his career. He is not an easy out by any means. So if you're going to do it, you may have to go longer. But you would think the longer the bout goes, it would favor Miocic, especially considering what we saw in that first bout 3 years ago. Brett, Ariel, as always, appreciate the time. Much more coverage from those guys over the next couple of days as we get you set for UFC 260. And hey, stay locked in. We've got you covered everywhere. ESPN Plus, ESPN.com, social media, ESPN MMA on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat. Yeah, we are everywhere that people are having conversations about the UFC and especially UFC 260. Well, the heavyweights are there. They're ready to go. The contender looking for revenge, 263 pounds for Francis Ngannou in the rematch with Stipe Miocic. And there's going to be a 29-pound difference as the champ comes in at 234, a little lighter than the first time he took down Ngannou. What will happen Saturday night? We'll find out. I'm Michael Eaves. Thanks for watching here, the UFC 260 official weigh-in show.